The private room in the Kennedy Center was filled with whispers, clinking glasses, and polished intentions. It was meant to be an evening of polite diplomacy, an international youth summit hosted by Washington's elite, showcasing future leaders of the world. Among the special invitees were President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso and Barron Trump, now an emerging political figure, known more for his family name than his diplomacy. Ibrahim Traoré stood tall in his signature green uniform, sleeves slightly rolled, his presence calm yet commanding. He wasn't there for theatrics. He was there to speak about youth empowerment and African autonomy. But the room wasn't ready for what was about to unfold. Across the hall, Barron Trump, dressed in a sharp navy suit, smirked as he approached the table where Traoré stood, surrounded by a group of young activists. Cameras were already on them. It was a perfect photo op. "You really came dressed like a revolutionary," Barron said with a smug grin. "Makes sense though. Your skin says enough. A symbol of weakness." A silence colder than the Washington winter swept through the room. A few chuckled nervously. Others gasped. One American journalist lowered her phone, stunned. Traoré didn't flinch. He took a slow breath, eyes locked on Barron, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous: control. "Do you know what else this skin has survived?" Traoré said, lifting his hand to his chest. "Colonial chains, IMF contracts, your father's politics. And yet, here I stand." Barron opened his mouth, but no words came. "I carry the sun of a continent in this skin," Traoré continued. "It doesn't break. It feeds nations." A hush fell. Even the most disengaged observers were suddenly alert. One student began to clap, then another, and another. Within seconds, the room exploded in applause. Even a few American congressmen stood up. Cameras flashed. Social media accounts were already buzzing. Traoré's response would be on every platform within minutes. But this was more than a viral moment. This was a warning shot. To the Trumps, to every global player who still believed Africa was a child to be lectured, Traoré had just declared, "Africa doesn't bow anymore." The applause faded, but the tension didn't. Barron Trump stood motionless, his carefully styled hair catching the light of the chandeliers as he processed the blow Traoré had just delivered. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had been briefed that Traoré was a soldier, not a speaker, that he would be stiff, formal, out of place in a room filled with Ivy League charm and American polish. But instead, Traoré had just taken control of the narrative, and the room, with fewer words than a campaign slogan, a whisper cut through the buzz. "He handled that like a damn president," a young staffer muttered near the back of the room. Traoré, composed, stepped forward, not toward Barron, but toward the podium. The event host, visibly flustered, tried to intervene, but a wave from a senior official gave Traoré the floor. He didn't need permission. He had the momentum. "The West has always told us what we are," Traoré began, voice calm yet heavy with weight. "You called us savages, then servants. You called us poor, then resource-rich. You called us corrupt, then demanded we sell you our gold." He paused. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped. "But I am not here to remind you of your sins. I am here to remind you that Africa remembers, and rises." The screen behind him, intended to loop youth program statistics, now displayed his image mid-speech. Someone in the tech booth had taken a side. "In my country," he continued, "strength is not measured by how many you conquer, but how many you raise. And no skin color holds a monopoly on strength." Camera lenses zoomed in. Barron shifted his weight, forced a tight smile, and gave a slow, sarcastic clap. He leaned toward a nearby senator and whispered, "Let him have his moment. He'll go back to dirt roads and dust." But his words were picked up by a hot mic. Within minutes, the clip would make it to social media, spliced side by side with Traoré's calm, defiant speech. The contrast was cinematic. Black power in dignity, white privilege in decay. Outside the venue, protesters gathered, some against African mining injustice, some simply against Trumpism. But for the first time in a long while, they were chanting the same name. Traoré, Traoré, Traoré. A man born in the Sahel had walked into a Washington ballroom and disrupted the myth of Western dominance, not with weapons, not with wealth, but with words. And Barron Trump had just given him the perfect stage. That night, the video was everywhere. Clips of Traoré's quiet storm of a speech filled timelines, TikTok reels, Instagram stories. His words, "Africa remembers and rises," were now captioned in dozens of languages. Hashtags like #TraoréRises, #BlackStrength, and #AfricaSpeaks trended above even Washington's political squabbles. But in the private circles of American power, the mood was far from celebratory. Inside a secured wing of the White House, Barron Trump sat around a table with senior advisors and PR strategists. A digital projection on the wall played the clip, again. Traoré's words echoed like a verdict. Barron's jaw was clenched. "They're treating him like a civil rights icon," he hissed. "Because he acted like one," someone muttered under their breath. "What did you say?" Barron snapped. But no one answered. The silence said enough. Meanwhile, halfway across the city, Traoré sat alone in a modest embassy office, his jacket hung neatly over a chair, his fingers wrapped around a cup of strong tea. He wasn't smiling, not yet. "I didn't come here for applause," he said quietly to his aide, Mariam. "I came here for leverage." She nodded. "And now you have it. Even some of their media outlets are calling your words a moment of truth." He looked out the window, where a small crowd still lingered outside the embassy gates, holding up signs not of protest, but of support. "Respect Africa. Traoré spoke for us. Truth has no flag." Inside, his phone buzzed with messages from other African leaders, some congratulatory, others cautious. But one message stood out, a secure line, encrypted and anonymous. A warning: they won't let you leave the US with your reputation intact, or your influence. Traoré's eyes narrowed. "It begins," he murmured. Mariam stepped closer. "Do you want security increased?" "No," he said. "I want every meeting recorded, every conversation documented. If they come at me, I want the world to see it." Meanwhile, Barron had already activated a counterstrike. His father's old contacts in the media machine were summoned. The headlines began to shift. Was Traoré's speech anti-American? Foreign leader attacks US on our soil. Africa's strongman or social media showman? But it was too late. The world had already chosen their clip. And in it, a young African soldier stood unshaken, while a boy born into power tried to mock the sun for shining. The next morning, Washington awoke to a new kind of storm, not of clouds, but of questions. Cable news anchors debated Traoré's remarks while Twitter was ablaze with side-by-side comparisons. One screen showed Barron's sneer, the other, Traoré's calm defiance. The contrast wasn't just racial, it was moral. In a cafe near Howard University, a group of students huddled around a laptop. "You see the way he held the room," one of them said. "Didn't raise his voice once, and still slapped the system in the face." "That's leadership," another added. "That's what we need here, not trust fund robots." Meanwhile, in a Pentagon briefing room, things were far more tense. Traoré had meetings lined up with 3 congressional committees, 2 think tanks, and one unexpected guest, General Madsen, a senior advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "We need to know where he stands," the general said. "This man has the heart of a revolutionary and the mind of a tactician. He's not just trending, he's dangerous." "Dangerous to who?" someone asked. "To the world we built," the general answered bluntly. At the Capitol, Traoré arrived in a dark suit, no medals, no dramatics, just a quiet presence that still turned every head. He was escorted to a closed-door session on US-Africa relations. Barron, despite not holding public office, was already in the room, seated beside a few neoconservative senators. He smirked again, this time more guarded. "Still playing revolutionary," he said under his breath as Traoré took his seat. "I don't play," Traoré replied calmly. "I build." The moderator cleared her throat and began the session. But no one was listening to her, not really. The tension between the two men had stolen the room. Everyone waited for the next spark. It came quicker than expected. A senator questioned Traoré's recent refusal to renew a U.S. mining contract in West Africa. "You realize, Mr. President, that rejecting that deal cost your nation millions in aid?" Traoré leaned forward. "Do you realize," he said slowly, "that accepting it would have cost us our soul?" The room fell quiet again. Barron leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, whispering to a nearby aide, "Get ready. We're gonna bury this guy in policy papers and media spin." But outside the chamber, the world had already made up its mind. Traoré wasn't just speaking for Burkina Faso anymore. He was speaking for every nation that had ever been told to trade dignity for dollars. By the afternoon, Traoré had become a paradox for Washington. To some, he was a threat wrapped in diplomacy. To others, he was the guest who had dared to speak a truth that made even the stars on the American flag wince. Yet for Traoré, it was never about theatrics. In a quiet side room of the embassy, he met with a small group of African American community leaders, civil rights activists, educators, tech entrepreneurs, and veterans. People who had lived in the shadow of a system Barron Trump represented without even understanding it. "You didn't just speak for Africa yesterday," said Dr. Helena Rhodes, a retired professor from Atlanta. "You spoke for every black child who's ever been told they don't belong." Traoré listened silently, respectfully. "I'm not a savior," he said. "I'm a soldier. I just refuse to be polite to power when that power has done nothing to earn our silence." "You earned our respect instead," another added. "And that's more than most leaders manage in a lifetime." The conversation shifted to coalition building. A transatlantic initiative was suggested: youth exchanges, cultural programs, business incubators. Real bridges, not the rhetorical kind. Meanwhile, across the city, Barron Trump was crafting his counterplay. His advisors were already drafting a public address, one that would frame Traoré as divisive, ungrateful, and dangerously Pan-Africanist. A few older diplomats urged restraint, warning that open hostility could backfire. Backfire? Barron laughed. He insulted this country. "I'm going to remind the world why we're the superpower." But while Barron prepared his speech, a more urgent matter was developing behind the scenes. An internal intelligence report landed on a Pentagon desk. Evidence suggested that Traoré's media team had captured not just his speech, but Barron's whispered insult too. And they were planning to release the uncut footage. "Once that clip goes live," the general warned, "we won't be debating diplomacy. We'll be dealing with a global PR earthquake." And yet, Traoré wasn't preparing to release anything, at least, not yet. In his private office, he stared at the frozen frame of Barron leaning in, lips curled, eyes narrowed, mid-insult. "This moment," Traoré whispered, "isn't just about skin. It's about masks. And I think the world deserves to see what lies beneath." The uncut video dropped at 8:04 p.m. No logos. No music. Just raw footage. It began with Barron's approach, the smug smile, the lean in. "Your skin says enough." A symbol of weakness. Then, Traoré's slow lift of the head. The pause. The precision. "Do you know what else this skin has survived?" The internet didn't walk, it ran. Within minutes, hashtags like #BarronTheBigot, #TraorSpeaks, and #ColorIsPower flooded every feed. Influencers, educators, journalists, and even celebrities weighed in. Some criticized the leak. But far more praised its timing. The video was like a mirror, and the American public was forced to look at itself. Cable news anchors argued over whether the leak violated diplomatic norms. But for everyday viewers, the answer was simpler: the truth had slipped through the cracks of curated politics. In downtown D.C., protesters gathered in Lafayette Square holding up signs that read, "We stand with Traoré. Black is not weakness. Our skin is our history." At the White House, Barron was livid. His speech, designed as a public pivot, was now dead on arrival. "This is sabotage," he yelled at his press team. "I should sue the embassy." Legally, his chief counsel said carefully, he didn't violate any laws. The room wasn't classified. "And you weren't a government official." "Then we'll destroy him another way," Barron growled. "Dig up something. anything. But Traoré had anticipated this. As the protests grew, his embassy released a carefully written public statement. Burkina Faso believes in transparency, dignity, and the power of history. President Traoré's skin carries generations of resistance, not resentment. And if that makes some uncomfortable, then perhaps they should examine why. The statement didn't just quiet the storm, it redirected it. Now the focus shifted, not just to Barron's insult, but to how America still misunderstood the very foundation of its own strength, its diversity. Traoré's approval ratings in African and diaspora communities soared. Several Black American politicians tweeted support. Even prominent figures who'd never commented on African politics suddenly stood behind him. But it wasn't about going viral. In a quiet embassy hall, Traoré met with his media advisor, who asked, "Why release it now?" He looked out the window toward the glowing Washington Monument and said, "Because sometimes the shadow of truth must fall on the tallest pillars, to remind them what they're built upon." That night, while Washington battled a media frenzy, Ibrahim Traoré walked alone through the reflecting pool near the Lincoln Memorial. He didn't need guards, didn't crave spotlight. He simply wanted silence. Stillness. He stopped at the base of the statue and looked up at the face carved in stone. Abraham Lincoln. The man who freed the slaves, but never freed the system. "It's poetic, isn't it?" came a voice behind him. It was Congresswoman Maya Collins, a rising Black leader from Chicago. She approached with her coat wrapped tight and a look of both admiration and concern. "You woke the country up, Ibrahim," she said. "But waking up doesn't mean healing." "I didn't come here to heal America," Traoré replied. "I came to make sure Africa never catches its disease again." Collins nodded, understanding more than he said. "The truth is," she added, "what you said, what you stood for, even I couldn't have done that on the floor of Congress without being torn apart." "That's the difference," Traoré said. "You speak from inside their house. I speak from the lands they tried to burn down." Suddenly, her phone buzzed. She read the alert and froze. "What is it?" Traoré asked. "Barron just booked a live interview on national TV, tonight. He's going on the offensive." At 10 p.m., Barron Trump appeared on the Daily Verdict, seated under warm studio lights, expression sharp, tone sharpened even more. "Ibrahim Traoré disrespected our country. He insulted our values," Barron declared. "And frankly, this continent keeps biting the hand that feeds it." The interviewer paused, stunned. "Are you saying Africa should be grateful?" "I'm saying," Barron continued, "that without the West, Africa wouldn't be on the map. Let's not forget who built the systems they now complain about." Social media exploded. But not in Barron's favor. Within moments, hashtags like #ModernColonizer and #BarronErasedHistory trended globally. A South African journalist tweeted, "He just said Africa should be grateful? For what, being looted?" Traoré's team didn't respond immediately. They didn't need to. The people were responding for them. In Harlem, Accra, Dakar, Johannesburg, London, murals of Traoré's defiant stance were already going up. His words had crossed continents. His silence now spoke louder than Barron's entire tirade. And yet, inside the embassy, Traoré sat at his desk, pen in hand, drafting a speech. Not to retaliate, but to redefine. "This is no longer about insult," he whispered to himself. "This is about history, being written by those who once had no ink." The speech was set for the following evening at Howard University, one of America's most prestigious historically Black colleges. It wasn't the White House, it wasn't the UN, and it wasn't a staged summit. But it was the right place. A place where voices weren't filtered, but forged. The auditorium filled quickly, students, professors, diplomats, media crews from across the globe. Even those who had no idea who Ibrahim Traoré was a week ago now waited with phones raised and eyes wide. As he stepped on stage, there was no introduction. No choir. No spotlight gimmicks. Just a man in his dark green captain's uniform, shoulders square, eyes clear. He waited 5 seconds before he spoke. "Last week, I was told that my skin was a symbol of weakness," Traoré began. His voice didn't rise. It cut. I want to thank that voice, not because he was right, but because he reminded us that the war is not over. The war for dignity. The war for memory. Silence. Then a slow, collective inhale from the audience. "My skin," he continued, "has crossed deserts under chains. It has picked cotton under guns. It has been whipped, lynched, branded. And still, it carries nations. Builds futures. Endures." A young student in the third row wiped tears from her cheek. "My skin," Traoré said, stepping forward, "has walked barefoot across fields to build schools with no roofs. It has held rifles to push out tyrants. It has stood between children and bullets. And still, they call it weak." He paused. "But you know what weakness is?" he asked. "It's needing to insult what you fear. It's hiding behind power instead of earning respect. It's rewriting history because the truth terrifies you." The crowd roared. Some stood. Others just held their heads in disbelief. But they all felt it. This wasn't just a clapback. It was legacy in motion. He ended with a simple line. "I was not born to be tolerated. I was born to be remembered." As he stepped away from the podium, the crowd erupted, not just in applause, but in unity. Across the internet, the speech went viral. Prominent black thinkers called it one of the most important diasporic moments in a generation. African presidents praised his courage. Even some white American commentators admitted, "We got schooled tonight." And somewhere in a private estate in Florida, Barron Trump watched in silence, this time with no smug grin, no insult to hide behind. Because no matter how loud he had shouted, Traoré had spoken louder. The morning after the Howard University speech, the global press didn't mince words. A modern Mandela? The Guardian. Traoré redefines black power on American soil, Al Jazeera. More than a president, he's a movement, The Atlantic. Back in Burkina Faso, thousands gathered in Ouagadougou's Unity Square, holding up posters of Traoré with the words, "Our skin, our shield." But this wasn't just a media frenzy. Something deeper had shifted. Across U.S. campuses, from Morehouse to UCLA, black student unions began hosting Traoré dialogues, open forums on race, colonial memory, and African sovereignty. Professors used clips from his speech as classroom material. Even in Congress, murmurs began. Representative Hakeem Jeffries, carefully walking the line between diplomacy and dissent, released a statement. President Traoré reminded us of something America forgets too often: truth is not an attack. It is a mirror. Meanwhile, Barron Trump scrambled to reclaim control. He hired a new PR team, crafted a follow-up video, and tried to pivot the narrative toward national strength and Western legacy. But the damage was done. Polls showed 72% of young Americans aged 18 to 29 sided with Traoré on the exchange. 58% of black voters said they viewed Barron as racially insensitive. Even among conservative circles, the consensus was that he had picked the wrong opponent. But Traoré didn't celebrate. Because for him, this was never about winning an argument. It was about confronting a system that had stolen too much, for too long. At the Burkinabe embassy, Traoré sat with his chief advisor. "They're calling you a revolutionary," the advisor said, scrolling through articles. "I'm not," Traoré replied calmly. "I'm just a reminder." A reminder of what? He looked out the window, past the fog of D.C., beyond the headlines. That the continent you once stole from, now speaks. And it doesn't whisper anymore. Meanwhile, a new opportunity emerged. Howard University extended an official invitation for Traoré to sponsor a Pan-African Youth Fellowship, aimed at connecting black students across the US, Africa, and the Caribbean. He accepted without hesitation. The seed of something lasting had been planted, not just a speech, not just a clapback, but a structure. A bridge between continents, built not with apology, but with pride. And yet, something else lingered. A memo, left on Traoré's desk. Confidential. U.S. Diplomatic Intelligence. It read: Barron Trump is considering a political run. He views Traoré as a threat to his international image. Traoré folded the memo, placed it in his pocket, and whispered, "Let him run. History isn't written in shadows anymore." Weeks passed, but the echo of Traoré's words didn't fade. It resonated in song lyrics, murals, podcasts, even in high school debate tournaments. A new generation had found language for their identity, and the messenger hadn't come from America's political class, but from a captain born under the Sahel sun. Back in Burkina Faso, the energy was electric. Young people painted Traoré's words on school walls. "I was not born to be tolerated. I was born to be remembered." Universities requested live video Q&As. African newspapers began running weekly opinion columns titled The Traoré Doctrine. What began as a response to an insult had become a doctrine of dignity. But not all applause was loud. In Washington, Barron Trump was quiet, but calculating. His team had begun laying the foundation for his future run: meetings with donors, contracts with media consultants, subtle pushes for Western Pride rallies. He wouldn't forget the humiliation. He would return, with a vengeance dressed in patriotism. And Traoré knew it. During a quiet dinner at the presidential compound in Ouagadougou, he met with his closest military advisors. Not to discuss war, but to prepare the next front, global narrative. "We don't need more slogans," he said, slicing through grilled yam. "We need symbols. Education centers. Exchange programs. Media that tells our story before they do." "And what of Barron?" an aide asked. Traoré leaned back. "Barron is not the enemy. He's the echo of one." That night, he recorded a video, not for Americans, not even for Africans, but for every black child across the globe who had ever been told their skin meant less. In the dim-lit video, he spoke directly to the camera. "They told us our darkness meant weakness. But the night is where warriors are born. They called us primitive. But we are the memory of the first fire. They mocked our pain. But our scars are maps, and we know exactly where we're going." It went viral within hours. But more than that, it was archived. Saved. Played in classrooms and churches and homes where pride had once been quiet. The final nail in Barron's attempt to spin the narrative came from an unexpected place. Michelle Obama. In a university roundtable, she said, "What Traoré did wasn't about politics, it was about soul. And when someone speaks with that kind of soul, you don't debate them. You listen." And so, history closed its chapter not with a war, but with a word. Not with dominance, but with dignity. Epilogue. Months later, a small plaque was placed at Howard University's main entrance. It read, "Here stood a man they once called weak, until he showed the world what strength looks like in brown skin."